Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Damon Martin.
And I'm Patrick Guerra.
And Patrick, this week we are digging into the new Blumhouse original film, Imaginary. And I have to start by asking the question, did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
Interestingly enough, Damon, this is the kind of weirdo kid I was. I did not have an imaginary friend, but at one point I said to myself, maybe I should have one. And so I tried to have one. I remember this very specifically. And then I just remember thinking to myself, this is stupid. I don't think there's an imaginary friend here. I don't know why I'm trying to pretend there is one. So I just dropped the whole thing. I dropped the charade. What about you? Did you have an imaginary friend?
I definitely did as a little kid. I had older brothers and sisters, but they were all way older than me. By 6 years was my closest sibling. So
yeah.
I didn't grow up in a house where I had siblings that were close to me. It was kind of like that tortured sibling relationship where they beat you up, and I was the youngest child. So I did have an imaginary friend for a little while. I don't remember how long it lasted. Maybe it was over a summer when the kids were out of school or something. I couldn't remember, but yeah, I did have an imaginary friend for a little while, and that concept was not foreign to me. So interesting that this is the film we're talking about today, called Imaginary.
Yes, Imaginary, starring DeWanda Wise as Jessica, Tegan Burns as Taylor, Piper Braun as Alice, directed by Jeff Wadlow, written by Greg Erb, Jason Ormond, and Jeff Wadlow, and it was released, Damon, just this month, March of 2024. Damon, earlier this year, we had another PG-13 movie come out called Night Swim, and we were a little bit worried because PG-13, will it really deliver the goods? And we ultimately concluded that what Night Swim was missing was teeth. It was missing a hardcore element. It was just too middle of the road, and it didn't work without some edge to it. And by the way, it was just a haunted pool. So how do you make a haunted pool interesting? You had to kind of go to the edge, and they never quite went there. I was getting more and more afraid that we were going to have the same issue with Imaginary. And then I saw trailer number 2 for Imaginary, because I go to the horror movies and I see the trailers, even though I don't want to see them, I end up seeing them. And I saw the second trailer for Imaginary, and I said, this is already scarier than Night Swim. I'm not trying to pick on Night Swim, and I think there's some people out there who like it. But I was like, if this is all the scary moments in the entire movie, it's still scarier than Night Swim. I almost came in going we can't lose. We're already scarier than Night Swim.
And also, you mentioned PG-13. We also got to mention Lisa Frankenstein, which was another PG-13 horror film that came out this year. That was kind of a film that wasn't bad, it wasn't terrible, but a film that felt like it could have gone much further and been much better, in my opinion. So I think that was kind of a common theme with the 2 PG-13 films we saw already this year. And I will say, and we've mentioned this many times, and people who listen to this podcast regularly are probably sick of hearing it, but typically the release calendar early in the year is a little rough for every studio. These are not the films meant to earn a lot at the box office. Now, Dune 2 is clearly upsetting that apple cart a little bit, but that's also a film that was supposed to come out last October. It's coming out now, it's killing at the theater. But typically speaking, you don't start to get more bigger theatrical releases till March. Now, we are getting into the meat of it in March because we have Imaginary, and then later this month we have Ghostbusters coming out. We have Immaculate, the new Sydney Sweeney film. We have Love Lies Bleeding, which is a film you and I are way excited about. And then we roll into April where we have films like Abigail. And so then the calendar just really starts spiraling into just full-on normal year ahead. And we're going to have a lot of films I'm sure we're going to love. And I'm sure there's going to be some in there we don't like. But it always feels like we kind of get set off on a bit of a negative tone to start the year because this is not the time when they're rolling out. Abigail, to me, feels like a movie that the studios behind that film are really pushing because it's the creators behind Ready or Not and Scream 5 and 6. Great, big named cast. They put a lot into that film. There's a reason why they're putting it out in April, because they want it to do well. Typically, people are not leaving their house in the middle of January to go to the theater, at least, generally speaking. So Night Swim and even Lisa Frankenstein to a different extent had that kind of working against them. They were not going into the theater when people are rushing out there to watch these films. You're almost kind of like, okay, we know we're going to put them out there. People might go to see them, but then we'll probably try to recoup our costs in home release, whether it's through digital or Blu-ray sales or just selling it to HBO or Showtime or something like that. March is where things start to turn, typically. And Imaginary is kind of the first one of these films. Now, Patrick, I had a similar feeling to you about the PG-13 of us all when I heard this was PG-13. My initial reaction was, really another PG-13 horror film? Because right now, I'll be honest, I'm kind of 0 for 2. Night Swim didn't do it for me, and a lot of people really did not like our Lisa Frankenstein review because a lot of people loved that movie. We did not. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. And so I'm kind of 0 for 2 on the PG-13 stuff this year. So I kind of went into Imaginary, not saying I prejudged it, but I had like a, oh man, here we go again, kind of feeling going into it. Now, coming out of it, some of my preconceived notions came true, but then a key difference with this film happened, and it changed my perspective on this movie. You heard me mention it a little bit in the intro, and I want to mention it again here. When Jeff Wadlow went to Blum, Jason Blum, the owner, the head of Blumhouse, and said, "What are you looking for? What are you interested in doing?" And Jason Blum told him, "Well, we've done Halloween, we've done The Purge, we've done the ultra-violent movies, we've done a lot of things. What about a film that is supernatural, still scary, but skews younger, almost like a gateway horror film for young teens? Not even talking about like 16, 17, like 13, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids could see a movie and kind of get into it in horror. For you and I, guys like us, that was The Lost Boys, that was Monster Squad, things like that." When I heard that quote and I rethought about Imaginary, it changed my perspective on the movie. Because while I'm not sitting here saying to you right now this was a tremendous movie and it's going to be on my top 5 list at the end of the year, we will get into the good and the bad of this film in a little bit. But knowing that they were making this film specifically, not they were just making it so the biggest audience could come in and see it, which is what we've talked about in the past, sometimes haunts PG-13 movies because they try to take things out so the biggest possible audience can get into see it, because the R rating sometimes stands as an obstacle to a wider audience. The fact that they said, no, we're specifically making it PG-13 because we want 13-year-old kids to come see this movie. They're going to love it, and then maybe when they're 17, they're going to want to go see the next Halloween or the next Purge or whatever else it is. And when I heard that quote, I was like, you know what? I just had a slightly different perspective on this film. Now I kind of understand more what they were going for.
Yeah, and I didn't hear that quote ahead of time before I went to go see the movie. But as I'm watching the movie, I go, this is it's weird. Like, I want to say it's very safe. But I remember sitting there thinking, like, I think my kids, and I have a 6 and a 9-year-old, I was like, I think they would love this movie, but also be terrified by it. Like, it really had an appeal to young people. And then it's now that you say that, it sort of makes sense about some of the things I have a problem with this movie, but I have a problem with those because I don't need the certain things that I think they put in this movie, because they're trying to appeal to a younger audience that might need a different style of narrative. So they tried something different. Like if I would have known that going in, which you know me, Damon, I don't want to know nothing going in. But if I would have known that going in, I might have graded it on a curve while I was watching it, knowing like, oh, okay, if this is for kids between 11 and 13, then I can see why they made some of these choices. Because I mean, I was in an audience. I was actually in Los Angeles, and I got to watch this with a packed house Thursday night, and people were like laughing, and not in the good way. They were like, "What the hell is this?" Because they aren't like you and me, where they go read the trades every day, and they try to like, learn the inner machinations of movie making and learn the quotes and figure out what the director was up to. None of those people do that. They just buy the ticket and they show up. This was like a packed house on a Thursday night. They were looking for a scary movie, and instead they got something. They were like, "What? Why is this like this?" And I mean, there's a group sitting next to me, and they were going, "What? Why?" Now it makes sense. Now it actually makes sense, and I'm curious to see what Imaginary does over this weekend. We're recording this on a Friday, and the numbers come out Sunday. If this has big numbers over the weekend, they did their job. That means they got those 13-year-olds to the theater to go see this, because it's something that I think it would scare the shit out of my kids. I know it would. But it's kind of meant for them. It'd be like, yeah, this is our movie, kind of like Five Nights at Freddy's, where you and I were just like, I don't know, this doesn't really work for me. I know a 7-year-old who is obsessed with that movie and watches that movie multiple times a day. Because to you and me, not a scary movie, but to them, it's, it's thrilling. It's their Monster Squad. It's their Lost Boys. They love that. So, okay, did I love Imaginary? No, but I also didn't hate it. And for a lot of reasons that we'll end up having to dogpile once again on Night Swim, to be honest with you. I'll have to, because I think what you said earlier, where Night Swim is the case of, we made a PG-13 movie so more people could see it. Not because the story needed to be PG-13, but because how do we make this more accessible to more people? There was a different thought process with Imaginary, so you got a completely different movie, and I'm very curious to see if that turns out to be something that a bunch of kids show up to over the weekend.
My hope is, and if I had one complaint about the marketing for this movie, is that it wasn't made totally clear for that. Now, I don't watch a lot of kids programming. Maybe you do because you have kids, but like, I don't know if they advertise for this movie on Nickelodeon or something, because maybe
we don't watch any of that shit here.
Yeah, so like that, it feels like that's the audience you want to appeal to. I'm not saying little kids, but 12, 13, those kind of
right.
kids. Those kids, I hope, are not watching Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad during the afternoon.
They probably are.
Probably are now. But yeah, like, it feels like, if I had one question, because this film it was marketed as a horror film, and it was marketed as a Blumhouse movie. Now, if you know Blumhouse, typically you think of The Purge and Halloween and movies like that. So I would say, if they made a mistake here, it was that it wasn't made clear that it was kind of that kind of movie, because I went in not knowing that, you went in not knowing that, and the only reason I know it now is because doing research after the fact to get ready for our podcast, I read the interviews with Jeff Wadlow, and he talked about it. And I'm like, oh, okay, now it kind of makes sense. So I would say it was a mistake not to better market it that way, because when I think back about the movies that influenced me most as a kid, now granted, I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Nightmare on Elm Street way too young. But the movies that I remember that I have this fond memory of as a kid that I still hold dear to my heart today are movies like The Monster Squad. The Monster Squad is probably my all-time favorite kids horror movie, right? And I watch it today and I love it just as much as I did then. But we talked about this with the movie Founders Day when we reviewed that. And we said, if this movie had been released in 1983, would we judge it a little differently than we are now? Because that film felt ripped right out of the 80s. Now, there were still a lot of plot problems and character problems and acting. There's a lot wrong with that film that went beyond just like where it was at in that movie. But I said that during the podcast. I said, if this film had been released in 1983, would we judge it slightly differently? We had that nostalgia factor, the way I think about My Bloody Valentine and films like that. I wonder if we saw Imaginary as 12, 13-year-old kids, maybe we'd have a slightly different perspective on this movie. And so I'm trying to tackle this from that as much as I can, because you and I are so messed up that the most whacked out horror films don't freak us out, but we can still enjoy them. So we don't, like I said, I've said this many times, I don't need the blood and the guts and the gore. I just a straight on gore fest. I've said this, and I've been very honest in admitting this. I love Terrifier 2, but I like it much better than Terrifier, because Terrifier is a lot more of just like carnage candy. There's not really a story there. And even the director, even Damien Leone would tell you that like it wasn't made for the purpose of like telling a great, impactful, plot-filled story. It was made to showcase his incredible artistry with practical effects. He made that movie for that reason, you know what I mean? So then you take Terrifier 2, where they inject more characters, more story, And I enjoyed that one more as a film because I like a story. So I'm not saying that you just need to throw in a bunch of blood and guts to make a good horror movie. That's absolutely not true. But at the end of the day, I need a good story. And what I think Imaginary did well, when I think of it from the perspective of a 13-year-old kid, the first time I saw Lost Boys or Goonies or, Monster Squad, was it's fun, gets a little goofy at times. The story's not too hard to follow because you can't make it too hard to follow because you're going to lose your core audience. And while I do have issues still with this film, which I will get to, when I left the theater, I was like, I can't quite explain this. This is not a great movie. This is not a great movie. But I weirdly enjoyed it. And I was like, that's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around when you're a movie reviewer like we are, where you're trying to articulate to an audience like why you should or shouldn't see a movie or why a movie is or isn't great. I'm sitting here telling you right now, I can tell you, we'll get into more why I liked it, but when I first left the theater, that was my initial thought. This is not a great movie, but weirdly, I kind of enjoyed it.
I know exactly what you're saying. It's the exact same feeling I had. And I think why, without getting into any sort of spoilers, I think why I felt that way is because I think the scares in this movie are very traditional. Like, it's almost cookie cutter. Like, I could almost accuse it of being cookie cutter, where it's just sort of like someone hears a noise, they turn around, we get a POV from their point of view, their specific eye, searching the room for maybe just an uncomfortable amount of time. Then they like look under a bed, and then a scare happens. Like, it's classic scares the whole way through, and it's being crafted that way, like almost to the point where it's like predictable, but it's still done with a lot of craft, with a lot of like properly, like, proper shots and proper lighting and proper setups and payoffs. Like, they're very basic setups and payoffs, but they're setups and payoffs nonetheless. And I think that's what's working. That's why I went, well, this is a horror movie. And I was sitting there going, this is way scarier than Night Swim. I was not scared at all of Night Swim, because I feel like what they did with Night Swim is they had a scary script and they pulled out the stuff that was too intense and they said, all right, whatever's left, make that a PG-13 movie. And they didn't bother to try to recraft it to make it scary at PG-13. This tries to make a scary PG-13 movie. It's like clearly designed to be a scary PG-13 movie, so it works. And I did think I think kids are gonna fucking shit themselves watching this movie. It's scary for kids, and it's, listen, it's kid based, right? So the plot is, yes, this woman Jessica, she's stepmom to these two girls, Alice and Taylor, and they get into this house and things aren't quite right, and there's an imaginary friend. Like, the imaginary friend, of course, is going to be the catalyst for all the sinister happenings. But how do you be sinister and scary when you're dealing with little kids and you want little kids to watch it? You actually play in the little kid sandbox. You don't go over to the local basketball courts and start doing a pickup game. You go to the playground and you play that game instead. And that's what they did here.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, like, our lead character, Jessica, she is our lead character, but ultimately her stepdaughter, Alice, is also the other lead character. Like, that's the two leads in the movie, is a little girl and her stepmom. They are really the leads in this movie. It's not just one person. And the plot of the movie, basically, as I mentioned in the intro, but just to kind of give a little bit more in depth here, and again, no spoilers, but basically, Jessica and her new husband, played by Tom Payne, who a lot of people will probably recognize from The Walking Dead, they live in an apartment in whatever city they're in, and it's an apartment that he used to share with his ex-wife, who has been... We don't get the full story. You kind of get like little breadcrumbs throughout the film to find out that she had basically some sort of mental breakdown, and she's kind of gone away from the family and had to be taken away from her kids. Her and her husband got a divorce, and now she's not part of their lives anymore. And now Jessica has gotten married, and now she's the stepmother to these kids. And of course, typical kids, the older teenager, Taylor, doesn't like the stepmom because she misses her mom. The younger girl, Alice, is more accepting because Alice is supposed to be, 5 or 6 years old. And so the new mom has been there for a couple of years. She's kind of grown up with her a little bit more, so she's a little more accepting of Jessica as her mother, as her stepmother. And so they decide like they need a fresh start. They need to get out of this place that they always shared with the former mom, with the mom who's gone now. And so they said that we need a fresh start. So they move back to Jessica's childhood home. Her dad has to go into elder care. They move back to her childhood home, and immediately upon walking in there, it's almost like she has no real memory of this place because she left it when she was 5 years old. Her dad sent her to live with her grandmother at 5 years old and really didn't raise her, but he stayed there in that house. And so she doesn't have a lot of memories. She walks in and she's like, there's what was her old bedroom has all these like crayon drawings all over the wall. She's an artist now. She writes children's books. And she has all this art all over the wall, but she doesn't remember drawing any of it. Like she has like basically repressed memories of living in this house. Although she said she left when she was 5. I have fleeting moments of my year as my 5-year-old kid. I still remember little things, but I don't remember like big chunks of my memory at 5 years old. I remember everything. So she doesn't make too much of it. Even in the movie, you're kind of like, yeah, I kind of see, like, I don't remember everything at 5 years old. And so then, she's trying to be a parent to the 2 kids because she's a stay-at-home mother because she's an artist and a writer, so she works from home. And Alice, her younger stepdaughter, is, kind of alone. They're in a new town. She's not in school yet or anything, and so she's kind of searching for her friend, and she ends up finding this teddy bear. And she takes it into her own, and she says, that's my new friend, Chauncey. And she starts talking to Chauncey and having full-on conversations with Chauncey. And the stepmom and the dad think it's adorable. She's having tea parties, and, like, it's all well and good. But then something starts to go weird. And this is in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything in here. Chauncey sets little Alice out on a mission to complete a scavenger hunt. And the scavenger hunt items start getting weirder and weirder, and it actually turns into, at one point, physical harm. Again, in the trailer, that's not a spoiler. Go watch it, you'll see it. And that's where things start to take a very dark turn, where you realize this imaginary friend, again, in your head, in the parent's head, is like, this is this little girl, like, having something wrong with her, but the imaginary friend, we find out, is not so imaginary. And so that's where it kind of spirals out of control, and they're dealing with a much more malevolent force in the house of this imaginary friend. The concept works pretty well for that part of it. And again, when you drill it down to this is for lack of a better word, a kid's horror movie, the concept works pretty well for me, Patrick.
When I'm sitting there in the theater and I keep going to myself, it's a fucking like Hallmark movie. Like this is a Lifetime movie. There was a level of like cheese on it that it was really bugging me. And now I know why. Yeah, they're really literally trying to explain. They're trying to explain the plot to little kids. For kids, it's kind of a complicated plot. I mean, it's not super complicated, but to be that complicated, they realized like, okay, when we do something, even if we show it to the audience, we're gonna have to repeat or explain what just happened. Like I was like, why are they doing this so often? It was jarring to me. I was like, I don't understand why they're doing this. Now I do. I'm like, oh, okay, for like a 13-year-old kid or even a 10-year-old kid who's kind of like all over the place, like if they miss a little piece, they need to now hear what just happened. They need to understand what just happened so they can get all the way through the movie. But when you're watching it as an adult, and I was surrounded by adults, we were all just like, the fuck is going on? Like, why is this movie why is it bashing us over the head with dialogue? Well, you got to explain things much clearer to kids. That new Willy Wonka movie, my kids love it. They eat that thing up. It's really talk heavy. I mean, aside from the singing, but like basically the movie is just them running around explaining everything that's happening. Guess what? It made hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. The kids love that. They just want to know what's happening. They want to know what's going on. They want to see great colors and great visuals on screen. They want to hear music. They want to see other kids. You get that in Imaginary, and it's scary, right? So it's dangerous for kids. So you're like, okay, cool. Like, and I'll say, I mean, I'm not going to spoil anything about is it scary, but I was like, but these scares are legitimate. Like, I'm not, these aren't little kid scares. They're constructed as grown-up scares, but they just use little kid imagery and little kid, a little kid point of view to kind of go through all of it, and it works. It actually does work. So that's why I think both you and I come out of it going, I like and dislike this movie because it's not really made for you and me.
Yeah, so it sounds to this point for me saying it's not a great movie, but I enjoyed it. So far, I'm just giving everything kind of glowing. Now, I'm not pointing out these things just to say, hey, I really didn't like this. Because again, I walked out saying, God, I don't know what it is. I kind of enjoyed this movie. They tackle and they use so many horror movie tropes in this movie. You might as well, I mean, if I didn't keep count during the movie, but I probably would have ran out of fingers long before this movie was over with all the things they did. I mean, you talk about the Hallmark Lifetime movie at all, even with the stepmom stepping into a marriage and kids, you had the bitchy teenage stepdaughter who was just instantly rebellious, which I understand. That's real life. I get it, but it just feels so overdone. Like that she's just like there's nothing you can do to help me. You're not my mom. And I'm like, is this like Brady Bunch or like what's like?
Yeah, very.
Didn't I see this after school special when I was like 12 years old? Again, I understand that is real life, and I understand step kids can be bitchy towards step parents. I understand it's like the kids taking advantage of a substitute teacher. I understand it happens, but it's so formulaic at some points where the teenage daughter is rebellious and she loves the dad, adores the dad, hates the stepmom. And it's just like, come on, like we're just so generic. You can't come up with any, like, I'm not saying you couldn't have some version of that, but does it really need to be that color by numbers that the 15-year-old daughter loves the dad, hates the stepmom, rebels against her, and then they throw in even more tropes. There's the next door neighbor boy who just happens to be the exact same age or right around the same age as the teenage daughter. Take a wild guess. Do they get kind of together? Oh my God, would you be shocked? And there's a giant spoiler. The boy next door meets up with the girl next door, and oh, there's flirtation. That never happens. So like little things like that, it's just like watching this movie and I'm just like, good Lord, did you just like write a checklist of like everything you needed to like throw in to make sure this movie felt like every other like movie you've ever seen? So that's where I said they fell into these formulaic things in this movie where I'm just like, good Lord, like I've seen this 1,000 times and I've seen it done better than this. But like I said, I know I keep saying this and I don't want to keep repeating myself, but when you know it's made for a 12 to 13, 14-year-old audience, you're kind of like, well, I guess that's kind of what they'd expect.
I wrote in my early notes during watching this, I go, this thing has the pacing of like a studio sitcom. Like it almost felt like watching, and I've only watched like maybe one or two episodes of like what's that? The Big Bang Theory. Yeah. Like there's almost like a Big Bang Theory like pacing and vibe to it. And it was real. I mean, the audience was catching it. I mean, they were like literally laughing like it was a laugh track. And I go, like, what is this? And then now I know. So I will say this for people who are listening and they're like on the fence about going to see this, and we haven't gotten to spoilers yet. We're right about to. I think it's good that you hear this now, knowing this now. I wish I had known this going in. I'd have a totally different feeling about it. And I think both you and I, we always kind of probably scroll TikTok in the morning really quick to just see what our horror content creators are up to. And they were all really like puzzled by this movie. They were like, I don't get this movie. I don't know. Like it's kind of good, but I also kind of think it sucks and I don't get it. It's because of these things. So if you haven't seen it yet, like pause before we get into spoilers and get into the plot and go see it with that in mind, knowing that you're going to get a lot of classic scares and that it is indeed made for younger audiences. It really is targeting them. And yeah, I'm very curious to see how that plays out. If the younger audiences are into it, I have no idea where it's like my kids are 6 and 9. They watch YouTube. That's their thing. So the ads they get on YouTube are like the ads for the stuff I watch. Like they're like, what's the Omen, Dad? I'm like, you're not going to want to watch the Omen. It's too. Trust me, it's too scary for you. But I don't know if they're seeing imaginary. You know, they know what Five Nights at Freddy's is, but they don't play the video game. They have no attachment to the lore at all, but they know exactly what it is. So I'm wondering if this is getting to kids. We'll see. We'll see come Sunday when the box office comes out.
As I said, I think that's my biggest complaint is the marketing, because I don't think it was, because I had no idea.
I mean, Damon, are you hanging out with any 10-year-olds? Probably
no,
not.
But I'm saying, like, even with the trailers, though, the trailers didn't like make it seem like it was that kind of film. Like, yes, it did have a kid in there, but I don't know. Maybe it's because it's Blumhouse. Again, I think maybe I just had the wrong expectations going in, but coming out of it, when I had that, it's not great, but I still enjoyed it feeling. And then when I found out what they were actually trying to make a movie for, I was like, now I get it. And I say this all the time, I have to sometimes with these kind of films, you said judge on a curve. I do, because I wonder, like, listen, I think Monster Squad is a masterpiece film, masterpiece film. And I could watch it now and enjoy it just as much as I did when I was 7 or 8 years old when I first saw it. But I wonder if I didn't have that nostalgia totally baked in already, if I saw it now, if I wouldn't pick it apart a little bit more with some of the cheesy lines and the acting and some of the things that go on in there, whatever it is. So again, I'm not saying that this is a classic piece of horror making cinema, but I just wonder if I had seen this at 12 or 13, that I wouldn't hold it in a little different regard, because that's who it's made for. And I wish I had known that going in, so at least I could have that realistic expectation of saying, oh, yeah, it's kind of cheesy and it's kind of like, feels a little Hallmarky or whatever, but at least I know that that's what they're going for.
You know what a great example is when you and I reviewed, what Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
Yeah.
We knew going in it was a young adult, not a young adult, it's like a tween. Younger. I think I was in like single digit age when I read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Like, we knew going in that it was going to be that kind of movie, and we fully accepted it for what it was. I actually think that movie kind of goes hard. like to be frank, I'm like, yeah, actually that movie could actually play for adults too. But I think knowing that going in, like, I think we gave that movie a pretty glowing review. Like, I think we liked it for the most part. So it would have helped to know that. But again, Imaginary is a totally original idea. So that's a bit of a risk for Blumhouse, but I don't know if it's going to pay off. I do know that despite the fact that, yes, we were kids when we watched Monster Squad, my kids love Monster Squad. My kids have Monster Squad t-shirts. They might be the only kids at their school that have them.
But they're also kids seeing it. That's what I'm saying. Like,
they're kids
now in our age, in 30s, 40s, you see that movie and you'd never seen it before and you didn't know anything about it. You watch it now, you might have a little slightly, I'm not saying you wouldn't like it. I'm just saying we'd probably have a slightly different feeling about it.
I think some younger, go ahead.
No, just it didn't. Then maybe we did, because again, it's a movie made for kids. Like, I saw it as a kid. I adored that movie as a kid, and I still adore it to this day as an adult. But I'm saying, like, if we saw it now, 35, 40, whatever the age is, and you had never seen it, never heard of Monster Squad, and you just sat down and watched it, here's the best correlation I could give you. The original Halloween, which audiences of that age considered the best horror movie of that era in the late 70s, early 80s. My girlfriend, who is younger than I am, had never seen it, and I was like, well, you got to see the original Halloween. And she sat down and watched it, and she's like, yeah, it was all right, but it wasn't scary at all. Didn't, like, do anything for me. And same thing with The Exorcist. When she saw The Exorcist, she's like, I liked it. It's not scary at all. Like, it was just, it looked kind of cheesy, and the effects were okay, and like the green pea soup. To you and me, as kids seeing that now, we're like, what the fuck are you talking about? That movie's terrifying. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Like, if we saw Monster Squad now, we'd never seen it before as 30 to 40-year-old men, we'd probably see it and be like, yeah, it's cute. It's a cute movie, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of...
I know some younger millennials that don't think Monster Squad's that great. They're like, it's like, that's all right, because they didn't grow up with it.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying. Like, that's where I think Imaginary... again, failed with the marketing because I had no idea going in. It almost seemed like it was like a straight up horror film from the marketing, from the trailers and everything. And then sitting down and seeing it, walking out of the theater, I was like, wow, there were some really cheesy parts in there. Man, that dialogue was whew. And some of the like the acting was fine. Not to knock any of the acting. The acting was fine, but like some of the dialogue was a little simplistic, and some of the plot lines, I was like, wow, you really dumbed this down, didn't you? You really did not want to. You were not trying to throw in like any kind of full on. You were not trying to fool anybody with this movie. But then when I read the interview afterwards, I wasn't upset, but in my head I'm like, why didn't you just like put this out there, as you said, with scary stories to tell? That's like seeing Goosebumps. We all knew what Goosebumps was as a
But
kid.
those are all established books.
I know, but
this is not. Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, that's the mistake I think they made, because this is supposed to be a gateway horror film. And to me, I didn't ever know that it was supposed to be that way. Now that I do, I'm judging it a little differently.
Yeah, and and maybe it's I think it's really tough to go, I'm going to make an original gateway horror film now, because what was not happening back in the 1980s and the 90s, the filmmakers weren't going, I'm going to make a gateway horror film. They were just making a horror film with the limitations they had. And sometimes they would turn that into the MPA and they'd go, okay, it's PG-13, or okay, that's PG. Jaws is G. Jaws is rated G. There's some genuinely terrifying moments in that. You can show it in a kindergarten class lawfully. You're not breaking the law by doing it. So times just have changed. So I think when you come in with the intention of making a fully original, like, gateway horror, that's a gamble. And that's why I keep saying I'm curious to see how it's going to do, because the gamble is, well, we hope a bunch of kids will talk about it and see it. It's like, that wasn't happening with you and me in the 80s. Like, we stumbled upon Monster Squad, which somebody just was like, cool, let's make the Goonies, but with like the classic Universal horror characters. They were just trying to make a movie. And then the movie came out and like kids latched onto it and loved it. And adults loved it and everybody loved it. But the intention was never going in like, we're just going to make like something targeted at kids, which is what this is. And so we have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think if I was gonna, not to rewrite The Living Dead here or anything, but I think if they were gonna redo this in a different way and kind of pitch it a different way, is like they obviously Alice, the little girl who's like one of the main characters of the movie, she is featured throughout the trailer. But you almost kind of feel like if you want to skew younger, you have to market younger, meaning more of the younger characters showing up, because I heard a lot of complaints after the new season of Stranger Things came out, the last season of Stranger Things, which was way more horror tinged than anything that show had done before, which is part of the reason we reviewed it on this show. And I had heard some parents complain, like, man, it got really violent and there's some really dark imagery in there. And like, our kids watched it because when Stranger Things started, all the characters were like 12-year-old kids. So it was marketed towards kids, and then it got a lot darker as the seasons went on and things got more violent. And I heard people complain about that. They're like, this is no longer like a kid's show. I don't think it was ever meant to be a kid's show. It just starred kids. So I think that's where you have to like balance what you're doing here, because I think this movie was marketed as a straight up horror film, or at least more of a horror film. And then it's actually not. Like, it is a horror film, but it's a kid horror film. It's a tween horror film. It is scary stories to tell in the dark. It is Monster Squad. It is The Lost Boys. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that at all. If I was marketing this, what I would have done is I would have made a bunch of YouTube shorts starring Piper Braun, like having her tell stories about her and the bear, which is called Chauncey the bear in the movie. I would have done a bunch of YouTube shorts of her and Chauncey the bear. I would throw in like, popular YouTube memes and stuff like that, and get kids, the young kids that's what they do. They consume YouTube and they watch their favorite little creators. That's how I would have marketed to kids, because they all the kids, ask all the young kids, they talk about Siren Head. Siren Head is like the stuff of legend on YouTube. It doesn't even hit our radar, but it's something that's like been on YouTube for so long, and kids just know that stuff. So that's how I would have approached this. And I don't know, maybe they did. I have no idea, because all I saw were trailers, and the trailers made it seem like it was something for adults.
Yeah, I don't even know what Siren Head is, so you can tell me right there. I don't have kids, so I was like, what are you talking about?
It's because I have kids. They're terrified of Siren Head. I'm like, that dude ain't even fucking scary. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. All right. With that being said, let's get into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Imaginary, it's in theaters right now. And if you can't tell, again, I kind of hope people listen to this before going in, because I feel like, again, if I had known that before I sat down in the theater, I would have walked out with a slightly different perspective, even though I did ultimately leave the theater thinking this wasn't great, but I still kind of weirdly enjoyed it. So Imaginary is in theaters right now. We are now in full-on spoiler territory. Let me tell you one thing about this movie that I really did enjoy, and I think this is what actually kind of turned me from like, this is all right or this was okay, to like, I kind of weirdly enjoyed this. And in the latter part of the movie, the characters Jessica, Taylor, and Alice travel to another part, to the imaginary world called the Never Ever. And it is almost like a dreamlike sequence where they travel. It looks very much like Alice in Wonderland. And if you read interviews with Jeff Wadlow, he flat out says that's why the lead character's name is Alice. It was kind of like look through, through the looking glass, a little bit of that feel to it. Pan's Labyrinth, he said, was influenced by the look and things. You go into this world and it's doors and stairs and, very like, again, very imaginary world is what you'd imagine it would look like. And it's all very blue tinged, and it's kind of like a dream. There's clouds overhanging. It's a very dreamlike state of almost like a generic version of somebody's dream. But you have to remember, again, you don't know this going in, but this is a 5-year-old's version of a dream world, and that's probably what a 5-year-old's dream world would look like. Once they got to the Never Ever, and they're dealing with scares and nightmares and attacks around every corner, and does this door open, does this door not open? You go in and there's one, you walk in and you're in a bedroom, and the next one you open the door and you're in the outdoors on a playground. Very dreamlike state. And my first thought watching that, when they went to the Never Ever, the mythical like fantasy land, I was like, this movie feels like a weird distant cousin to Nightmare on Elm Street, because that's what happens in all the Freddy movies. You go into the dream world, you think you're in your own dream, and then he drags you into Freddy's hell. Now, again, this movie's certainly not that violent, it's not that deep, and it certainly doesn't get as weird and messed up as the Nightmare on Elm Street movies yet. But I had that same feeling of like, it almost felt like that's what they were going for. You're in this weird dreamlike state. You open one door, you're in one place. You open another door in another place. You get dragged off into different places. There's monsters around every corner. That's kind of what I felt like with this movie.
The Never Ever is a very interesting. It was a composite of a lot of very classic things. Like, it felt like a little bit like the movie Labyrinth. I got some Beetlejuice vibes in there. Definitely Alice in Wonderland. It was all in there. It was familiar, cartoonish, like not too scary. Like, I would say the Upside Down in like Stranger Things is a scary place. Like, you actually are kind of scared to be there. This is sort of like, this kind of seems fun. It's only when the big bad thing, shows up that it's kind of scary, or Chauncey the bear himself. Here's where I got locked into the movie. It was actually quite a bit earlier, and that was basically the whole story. You talk about moving into the new house and being the stepmom and the imaginary bear, and then all of a sudden the bear is making this little girl hurt herself. You can see all of that in the trailer. None of that's a spoiler. It's what happens in reaction to that. So Alice hurts her, Jessica almost saves Alice from seriously hurting herself. Then she decides to call in a therapist. She's like something's really wrong here. I need to get somebody help, because she's trying to hurt herself now with this imaginary friend. It's getting out of control. During that session, a huge plot twist shows up. That plot twist is Jessica has a little powwow with the therapist, who is like, something bigger is going on here. And she goes, yeah, I don't know. Ever since she found that bear. And the therapist goes, what bear? And you're like, oh, interesting. What do you mean, what bear? She plays back the video of their little therapy session, and you see that little Alice is not talking to anything. There's nothing there. She sees the bear. Jessica sees the bear. Nobody else can see the bear. What does that mean? That was the thing that hooked me back into this movie. I was like, cool, a bunch of generic scares that are kind of working, a bunch of really heavy-handed dialogue, what's going on, and then this fabulous plot twist that only Jessica and Alice can see the bear, so they are intrinsically linked. Why, Damon? Why? Please tell me why this works. So all of a sudden, I'm locked back into this movie. Great device, really great device. And then things escalate from there. And eventually, Chauncey the bear coaxes Alice into this wonderland, into the never ever. And then a new investigation kind of has to spring itself up. They don't call cops. Excuse me. They don't call cops. Jessica decides to look at the walls in her house that she used to draw on as a little child and look for clues. And I was like, dude, that's like one of the more interesting ways I've ever seen someone get into trying to solve this problem. Now they screw it up for adults like you and me, but because they do that stuff and then they literally just explain it to the audience, and it was maddening. I was like, oh my God, this movie's talking itself to death. Now I know why it's doing that, so I forgive it now. At the time, I was furious because I was like, you don't need to do this. This movie is telling me everything I need to know. Why are you explaining what I just saw? But now I know why. Okay, so the 12-year-old who was texting during the movie can now look up and be explained what just happened. Got it. Okay, cool. So then that gets her and her other stepdaughter Taylor and this old woman who used to babysit little tiny Jessica when she used to live there, and they go on this adventure to go get Alice back. Classic like kid adventure shit. And I'm like, yeah, this works. Okay, cool. Like on a story level, I was into that. And so, and then it goes into the never ever, a lot of more heavy-handed explaining. And, you know, I don't want to get into like exactly how the movie like plays itself out, but I was just like, you know what? This is not bad. This is actually working. And then there's a second plot twist, and maybe I don't even bother like explaining it here. Like it's kind of fun to just like have that one little it's not as good as that first plot twist, but there's a second one where you go, oh, that's why so and so is being so weird. Got it. Okay, that makes sense now. So yeah, I think those things are the things that got me, because they were, I think, genuinely clever. And I think if you could manage to get a kid's full attention during that time, I think it's going to blow them out of their fucking seats, because they're going to go, oh, I didn't see that coming.
The Fight Club twist, what I call it, when you find out that Chauncey was never there in the first place, I really enjoyed that, because when she's like, you know, I'm really getting concerned about her carrying that bear around, and the therapist is like, what are you talking about? What bear? And then you see like everything that Alice has been doing, she's never actually had the bear. She's holding her arm out like she's holding the bear, but there's nothing there. But then you start to realize that Jessica can see it. Why could Jessica see it? Because this is Jessica's old house, and Chauncey was her imaginary friend as a kid. But this was actually a really good twist. When she's writing on the wall trying to figure out the thing and everything, she kept writing the word CB, Seebee, and you're like, CB. She couldn't say Chauncey the bear, so she shortened his name to CB. Chauncey the bear was CB. So you realize that her imaginary friend as a kid was also Chauncey, and this bear, this malevolent creature, has held on to her and was so angry that she left him as a kid, as a 5-year-old kid, and left and went to live with her grandmother. He's been building up all this animosity and malevolence over the years, and so when they return and there's another 5 or 6-year-old kid that it can latch on to, boy, does it ever latch on to Alice. And but again, the plot of the movie, which is, again, this is where I really enjoyed it. Alice gets pulled into the Never Ever, and they go to try to find her and bring her back out. And they succeed in breaking the will of the creature's hold over Alice. And Alice is like, I don't want to be here anymore. And they get her out. Then you start to realize there's another twist, as you mentioned, which, again, I'm not going to get into full on what happened. But you realize all of this, none of this was about Alice. None of this was about Taylor. None of this was about the other family. Chauncey wanted Jessica back. That was his original tether. That was the kid he was attached to originally in this house. And as you hear through the storytelling device, which, again, they really over-explain it, And let me tell you, the other part, one of the other parts of the movie I really didn't like was the weird neighbor who just knew everything. She became obsessed with the imaginary friend thing and like researched it and was telling you everything that you ever needed to know about imaginary friends.
She would just pause and like go on like a 2-minute diatribe explaining things. I was like, oh my God, this is awful.
So in ancient Sumerian times, I was like, so the weird neighbor was probably the worst part of the movie, if I'm being honest with you. But the one thing that the weird, pointless neighbor said that actually explains why this is happening is imaginary friends are actually spirits. Let's just, for lack of a better word, they're spirits. And for the most part, it's a good thing. They help kids adapt and learn how to socialize and you know, help kids come out of themselves and whatever. It's a good thing. But occasionally, one of these spirits will attach itself so much to a child that when the child grows up and forgets about their imaginary friend, that spirit kind of turns against them. It turns evil in a way because it's like, hey, I actually am here and you've just forgotten about me. So I'm going to, for lack of a better word, fuck you up. I'm going to come after you. That narrative twist I enjoyed because it's like this starts out as a good thing and it turns evil. So when you find out that this Chauncey, when this spirit was never after Alice, it didn't just attach itself to somebody else. It was always attached to Jessica. Luring Alice into the Never Ever was all just to get Jessica back in the Never Ever. I loved that. I thought that was probably my favorite part of the whole film when you revealed it wasn't just the spirit moved on to something else. It always wanted Jessica back. And so when there's this second plot twist, when they actually get Alice out of the Never Ever and Jessica is still in there, and you realize it was never about the new kid. It was always about Jessica staying there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I ultimately walked away satisfied because truth be told, under all the heavy-handed dialogue and the cheesy, you know, the sitcom moments, there was a good story in there. Like if you just took the beats out, if you just beated it out and you were like this beat to this beat to this beat, then this happens and then this and then whoops and then oh my gosh and then wow, you didn't see that coming and this happens, but then this happens, except that happens. Like that's actually good storytelling. It didn't read for me like clear as day, but like kind of talking through it and now knowing why they were doing what they did, I go, that's why I walked away going, I actually kind of like this. And that's why probably some of the other TikTokers that we follow were like, I don't get it. I kind of like this, but it was kind of dumb at the same time because it's just made for a different audience. But the storytelling, the beats of the storytelling, I think were very interesting.
The neighbor being obsessed with the Never Ever and full on just like dictionary explaining to you how she became obsessed with this Never Ever and she researched and it was her. She literally says in the movie, it's been my life's work. I'm like, oh my God, like this is you are really getting heavy handed with like the explaining narrative in this movie. Like, the weird neighbor was probably the worst part of this film because
she was getting a lot of reactions out of my audience.
Yeah, that was every time the older woman showed up and started explaining things or even talking, I was just like, this is not good. Like this is real bad. And yeah, but again, knowing what I know now, I'm kind of like, I guess you kind of had to have her in there a little bit at least to explain the total, you know, at least the part about the good spirits turning evil. I can take that much. I don't need to know that the Sumerian gods called these imaginary friends El Coco or whatever it was she called them. Like,
yeah.
We're going
I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's El Cocui, not El Coco, but I did, you know, there's different regions. Maybe she chose one of the other regions.
They do the classic thing where they show you the book and they show you the photos. I'm like, goodness gracious. And they also, another plot device. Here's another one, the whole check off the list here. The dad, conveniently, 35 minutes into the movie, goes away for the rest of the movie. He's on tour. He's a musician, apparently. And he just leaves. He's gone for the rest of the freaking movie. He never comes back. The entire movie. And I'm like,
he never reappears.
There's two versions of this story that's very Hallmark. One, the dad leaves and has to go to work and he's gone and mystically he cannot come back from where he's at. Like if there was an emergency, like at one point in this story, Alice just goes missing. Like they can't find. They don't. They don't figure out right away that she's in the Never Ever. They just think she's like walked off or
Yeah.
wandered off with her imaginary friend. And so the police come. Where the hell is the dad? Like, why is the dad not getting on the first flight back? His daughter's missing, and you're not there. So that's a plot device to bug me. But the other side is if the dad stayed, you know what he'd be doing, Patrick. He would be the disbelieving husband.
Yeah,
The
100%.
disbelieving husband, the disbelieving dad. Honey, you're blowing it out of proportion. There's nothing. The mansplaining husband. Honey, you're blowing this out of proportion. There's nothing wrong with having an imaginary friend. Don't worry about it. They went the other direction. They just got the fuck rid of him. They're just like, just get out of here and don't come back for the rest of the movie.
We can't have anyone being a contrarian. Everyone has to agree with it. The only contrarian was the stepdaughter, the older stepdaughter, Taylor. She was at first like, man, that's bullshit. There's no way that's true. And then one instance hanging out with the crazy neighbor, and she's like, it's totally true. I believe everything. Like she just immediately switched over. It's something I noticed. The other two writers, besides Jeff Wadlow, Greg Erb and Jason Ormland, you know what they wrote? They wrote Disney's The Princess and the Frog. That it makes total sense. They made they wrote like kids movies. So they wrote this too. You know what I mean? And by the way, a lot of this is something I know from watching a lot of Disney movies when the kids were younger. The storytelling, while simplistic and over-explaining, is actually pretty good. Like, again, like what I was saying, like the beats of the story, what is learned. I'm going to tell you right now, Damon, what I learned, one of the best Disney movies of all time is Moana. Like, I'm sure you've never even bothered to see it. Like, I'm sure you're just like, yeah, like, why would you? Why would I, right? I never would have seen it, but I had little tiny children. I had these like little 2 and 3 year olds who loved Moana and wanted to watch it every day. And I'm sitting there and going, I've watched it 3 times in one day. Like that's what parents do. And I go, this is actually a good story. And like the peaks and valleys and the arc of the characters, like all this stuff is actually pretty good. And so under the surface of all that schlocky kid shit that is just not my jam, there's good story beats. And that's exactly what's going on in Imaginary.
Do you want to know a secret about me, Patrick? Just so you know,
I would love to know.
Podcast. I have never, ever, not to make a joke about this movie, never ever seen a Disney cartoon movie.
No, not even the old ones from back in the day?
Nope. Never seen Dumbo, never seen Cinderella, never saw Bambi. I mean, I know the story of Bambi. I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
But like,
Bambi's dark as fuck, by the way. I used to watch Bambi when I was a kid.
Everyone's always marveled when I say that. They're like, you never saw a Disney movie as a kid. I was like, no, when I was a kid, and this speaks to how fucked up I am today. Yes, I did watch horror movies as a kid. I saw Nightmare on Elm Street 2 way too young. Like I was like literally like 6 years old when I saw that movie. I saw Transformers and G.I. Joe. I woke up every morning and my cartoons were Transformers, G.I. Joes, and like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So when I was a kid, I was going to see the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie in the theater. I was going to cry. I saw the Transformers movie in the theater and I cried like a baby when Optimus Prime died, okay? That was my cartoons as a kid. So I never saw the Disney movie. So everyone's always like, you've never seen a Disney movie? I have never seen a Disney cartoon movie in my life. Not a single one.
You know what I cried at? I cried at the end of T2. When Arnold goes into the lava, like I was like 10 or 11 years old. Like I'm realizing my kid's about to be 10 years old. I'm like, yeah, I was his age when Arnold went into the lava, and I cried because it was fucking sad. You know what I mean? Like, but I did watch a lot of Disney, Bambi especially, and Bambi's fucked up. Bambi's mom gets shot in like the opening moments of the movie. Like that movie's dark as fuck. Trust me, there's plenty of dark Disney out there, but I wasn't really into it. Like I've been like you, I watched a lot of G.I. Joe and Transformers and shit like that. I wasn't into Disney movies, but when you have little kids, they watch it ad nauseum. They've grown out of that now. Now they're all about Godzilla and King Kong and shit like that, which I fuck with that shit way more. You know, they have way more Godzilla stuff than any Disney thing they ever had. But I did notice that certain animated movies tend to have really good story beats, and it's funny to see that Greg Erb and Jason Ormland were indeed writers of Disney princess movies.
And last thing before we get to categories, I also do want to give tribute and pay credit where credit's due. When I was looking up and doing research for this movie, I saw Jeff Wadlow directed a movie. His first ever feature film was a movie from, I believe, 2005 called Cry Wolf. Have you ever seen Cry Wolf?
No.
It is a really good. I love that movie. It has one of the dudes from Supernatural. I can't remember if it was Jared Padalecki or the other kid. I think it's the other dude. Yeah, it's the other guy, not the non-Jared Padalecki guy. I can't remember what his name is.
Right.
It's got God, I can't remember her name. Hold on, I'm gonna have to look it up because it's gonna bug me. It's got actually John Bon Jovi is an actor in the movie. Kind of
Lord.
He's actually an actor. He plays a professor, a college professor in the movie. He's actually in that movie. It's got hold on here. Let me look who else it is. Came out. Let's see, Jeff Wadlow. 2005. Lindy Booth, who is also in Dawn of the Dead, the remake. She's the girl who kind of has the dog in Dawn of the Dead. Remember her?
Right. Yeah.
The remake. She's in it. Jared Padalecki, that's his name. John Bon Jovi. And then it's got like a teen cast. And Gary Cole is also in it. If you know Gary Cole, you know who Gary Cole is, right?
Not probably by face.
You would know Gary Cole by the... So, what about your TPS reports? Okay.
Oh, yeah, that guy. Yeah.
How's it going, Peter? or
What's happening?
Or you can go the other route and say what's the line? What's my favorite line? There's a kilo of Colombian Bam Bam strapped under the car and the cops are on the way. You got hair on your peaches or what? He's the dad from Ricky Bobby. He's Ricky Bobby's dad in College.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, he is in Office Space classically, but yeah, he's in it. But anyways, it's a movie about this kid who goes to college, and he's basically like his dad basically sent him there, and he's like, I want to say his dad's like the custodian of the college, so he doesn't. Everyone else, or it's not the college, it's a school, high school. Every other kid there is like privileged, right? Every other kid there is super privileged, but they have this club they get together with, and they tell each other stories, and basically like they it's almost like a murder club where one of them is actually a killer, and the rest of them have to figure out who is the killer in the group. And so they go around telling stories and all this, and then they decide to expand this outside their group and turn it into a murder story for the whole school, but nobody's in on the joke but these particular like 7 or 8 kids. And then people actually start turning up dead. And so, like, everyone's kind of turning against each other because these 8 kids in this group, or 6 kids, whatever number it is, they're the only ones who knew it was a joke the entire time. But when people actually start turning up dead, then they all start pointing the finger at each other. Like, you're the fault. You're actually doing this. Who's actually doing this? I love that movie. Now, I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but I did see it probably like 5 or 6 years ago, and it holds up. It's a really fun movie. And that was Jeff Wadlow's first ever film. So when I saw him, and I looked him up for this one, I was like, oh, I know this guy. He actually directed like a really, really good movie. Now, he also directed Never Back Down, the mixed martial arts movie, which is not great.
I know that one.
He also directed Kick-Ass 2, which I actually found more enjoyable more recently than I did when I saw it in the theater when it came out.
Yeah, I didn't like it when it came out.
It's actually, and Lindy Booth is actually in that as well. She's the one who plays Night Bitch in Kick-Ass 2.
That's right, Night Bitch.
Yeah,
great name.
Anyway, so I want to pay credit to Jeff Wadlow because I was like, I really didn't think I'd seen anything by him when I heard his name, and I looked up his filmography. I was like, oh, he did Cry Wolf. So if you haven't seen Cry Wolf, maybe we'll tackle that somewhere down the road. I don't know if it's even available. I think I went looking for it maybe like a couple of years ago to see if I could find it on like streaming, and I don't think it's streaming anywhere. So it might be one of those like lost movies that's just out there. But if you haven't seen Cry Wolf, I would recommend you to go see it.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, well, he did something here too. So credit to Wadlow. It's weird that I'm saying I like this movie more now that we've talked about it because I'm understanding like where they were coming from now makes me think this movie isn't as bad as when I walked out.
Yeah, actually, absolutely. All right, let's get into categories. Let's kick things off as we do each and every week here with best performance. So, Patrick, when it comes down to imaginary, who is your best performance?
My best performance. Oh shit! I pulled up the wrong email. My best performance. I always look at the email that I send to Damon because my notes one has every possible like answer on it, and so I just send him the one with my final answer. My best performance goes to Veronica Falcone as Dr. Soto. Now she does have a very short like moment in the movie, and you see a little bit of her in the trailer. She is the therapist that comes to the house. I just got a real kick out of like, you know, every now I'm understanding like what this everybody's performances are a little bit heightened. And so you're like, God, why is everybody being so wacky or sort of over the top? She, to me, was the one that sort of felt a little more grounded. And of course, that makes sense. A therapist to kids would have to be somebody that's sort of comforting and measured. And that's how she was. But she had this one line that fucking drove me. Tell me if anybody else in your theater was laughing when she goes, did your daughter take up any new hobbies recently, like ventriloquism? We're like, ventriloquism is a weird hobby for a 6-year-old girl in the 2020s.
Yeah, that was I found that equally like, really? That's where you went? Ventriloquism? Is that's what you're thinking, Aaron?
Yeah. This chick's really into howdy doody, Doc. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, she was good. I've seen her in other things. I wish I could name off like stuff I've seen her in before, but I do know her. And yeah, she was good. She played a really good kind of like that big reveal about, you know, Chauncey not being a bear. It really is an imaginary friend was a nice little twist, and she's kind of the catalyst in revealing that. So yeah, I thought she did a really good job in that part. So for me, so I'll be honest, I had not seen DeWanda Wise before, who stars in this movie. I thought she did a great job. Like, I really liked her. I thought she did a really solid job as like the lead of this movie. And I'd seen Tom Payne before because I watched The Walking Dead. But my best performance, in all honesty, is going to Piper Braun as Alice, because you and I have talked many, many times, Patrick, how a little kid, as much as we would love to not grade them for being a little kid, they can make or break a movie when your film is centered around kids. There's a lost episode of ours that we've never released. This is early on. I'm talking years ago early on. We did a review for Vampires versus Brooklyn. Remember that?
Vampires versus the Bronx, I think.
The Bronx, that's what it was. Bronx, Vampire, yeah. It's a Netflix movie. It was like early on in the beginnings of Rewind of the Living Dead. We recorded it, and just, it wasn't that we didn't like the episode. We just, back then, we used to record a ton of episodes and ahead of time, and then we just start releasing stuff, and we just there was never a time for us to release it. So at some point we will, because we've released other lost episodes we've had in the past. But one of the problems, our biggest problems with that movie, was the acting from the kids was real rough, and it just kind of ruined the movie. We kind of feel bad because, you know, it's a kid. Like, kids aren't supposed to be, you know, you're not supposed to be, you know, true thespians at 5-6 years old. Like, that's not supposed to be at your best. Some kids pull it off, but you're not supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't need Philip Seymour Hoffman at 6-year-old. Like, that's not what we're looking for.
Yeah, I'm not looking for that. But I thought Piper Braun as Alice did a really solid job. Now, I don't know how old the actress is. I didn't do a lot of research on her, but I imagine she actually is like 5 or 6, 7 years old. I thought she did a really good job of displaying all the emotions necessary. And to be honest, this is a bit of a heavy role because she has to play, you know, inquisitive, cute little child, but she also has to play terrified. She has to play a little bit dramatic at points. She has to do different things in this movie. And I thought, for a little kid, I thought she did a pretty damn good job.
And Damon, I will say I'm happy that you enjoyed her performance. Now, what's the next category?
Patrick, that's just mean.
I didn't say Damon. All I said was I'm happy you enjoyed her performance.
I thought she was fine. I thought for a little kid, I thought she did really, really well.
What's our next category, Damon?
Man, that's rough. You were not a fan of Piper Braun, I see.
I said nothing of the sort. I said I'm happy you enjoyed the performance.
Wow. Wow, man. That's
all I said.
Really just kicking me while I picked my choice there. Man, that's how this...
No, I said I'm happy that you enjoyed her performance.
How did you feel about her performance?
She had a performance. Fantastic. For her to have a performance.
So mean. So mean. All right, let's move on to our next category, since clearly Patrick is not going to rebound on this one. Let's move on to our next category, the MVP, the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award.
Let's skip Banana Hammock for this episode, since this is for the kids.
Nah, no one knew that going in, so yeah.
Kids, plug your ears while we explain what the Ken Foray Banana Hammock Award is all about.
The Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award is named after the great character actor Ken Foray from the movie From Beyond when he jumps down a flight of stairs and drives down into a basement to save the world wearing nothing more than a Speedo at the time and a butcher knife. So we say that's an MVP performance right there. So that's why we named our MVP award after Ken Foray, the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP. So Patrick, who gets your Ken Foray MVP award?
Damon, my MVP goes to whoever designed Chauncey the puppet. And I'm not talking about the little bear. I'm talking about Chauncey when he is in his full form. Now, it's weird. There's actually two forms. There's like a shadowy man that's sort of ghoulish. I'm not talking about that version. I'm talking about when the bear transforms into this large, monstrous bear, and you get a little shot of it in the second trailer, I believe. This is just a thing of beauty, and it does sort of move around in a way that like isn't totally scary. I just loved the design. I loved that they showed it a lot. Like it was almost like I don't know about you, but like I sort of felt like, man, I wish the Five Nights at Freddy's robots were this scary. You know, not that I was terrified. I thought it looked scary. It was designed well. It acts weird. It sounds weird. So I wanted to give the MVP to the creature designers because Chauncey the bear was kind of fucking scary.
So that was a category. We're going to move on to mine because probably. So one of my biggest problems with this movie was the 1992 It look to the creatures is what I felt it looked like. So I was a fan of the creature design. I felt it looked a little too like
even now knowing that it was kind of more designed for kids.
Yeah, 100%. It was very very we didn't have a lot of budget for digital effects, so we just went straight back to 1992 when they put a spider at the end of it, and you're like, wow, this does not look good. That was my reaction. You know what I actually said to myself leaving the theater? This was something I was going to bring up later anyways, so I might as well just bring it up right now. So Chauncey ends up being like, he transforms into a giant monstrous bear, right? And it's very CGI monster bear.
I think that's a practical bear. I'm pretty sure I saw actually like creature design. Like it was like they were puppeteers.
No, I'm pretty sure it was digital. I'm pretty sure I saw some things where they talked about how they designed it as digital. But anyway, neither here nor there. My thought was, and this is going to sound really cheesy, and people are probably going to agree with you more than they agree with me here. But my idea was, why not go full practical? Go full on 1980s and just put a dude in a terrifying bear costume.
That's exactly what it looked like, though.
No, it didn't, though. It looked over the top. It looked way too digital. It almost looked too digital.
I don't think it was digital.
It looks CGI to me.
I mean, we'll have to. We got to look that up after the show. I mean, we can't make people sit around while we search on the internet of whether it was real or not. But yeah, to me, it looked very like a guy in a suit.
Yeah, okay. If it was a guy in the suit, I wish they'd used a different suit because it looked a little too cartoonish. Now, again, if you're peddling this towards children, maybe the cartoonish bear is what you're going for. So again, I'm not, and I do know that the spider creature was part digital effects, but it was also a contortionist in the costume walking like the spider, which we've seen that done before in other films. But yeah, maybe it was a guy in a bear suit. I just didn't particularly like the bear suit. I wish it had been a little bit more terrifying. And again, but like I said, this is not a movie marketed towards me. It's marketed towards 13-year-old kids. And as you said, for you thought it was pretty great. And so maybe it was great. I don't know. Where I would go for my MVP award, and I was trying to figure out who actually, there's a lot of hands in this. So the reason I didn't single anybody out is because I know it's not just one person. But the one person I will single out in here because the way it was shot is the cinematographer, James McMillan. And the reason I'm using his name and not the entire set design is because the way they film in the Never Ever is done in such a really well done dreamlike sequence. And that's where I said it felt like a distant cousin to Nightmare on Elm Street, because one of the things that I love about Nightmare on Elm Street, even though, again, when you know you're in the dream sequences and things like that, things twist and turn, but you kind of know you're there and things kind of go from bad to worse when you're in the Freddy's nightmares. This film, when they get to the Never Ever, the camera turns and twists on its head. You're following upside down. You're going around corridors. It's almost like, very much like where we see the point of view of the alien in Alien 3, when you see that a lot of it, because they couldn't shoot the alien because it didn't look great and they didn't have a tremendous costume or tremendous set design to make the actual alien in Alien 3. How can we cheat that? Well, we can put the camera on a thing and make it look like it's coming from the alien's point of view. So throughout Alien 3, you see the alien chasing them up and down walls and over upside down, and what an alien would do. They kind of do that with the Never Ever. The cinematography and the set design, you go around corners, up and down walls. There's this great shot when they first enter into the Never Ever and they realize where they're at, where they do a wide shot, and you see this big, sprawling world of stairs and doors and clouds and all this different stuff. And it literally just looks like a fantasy land. And I just really enjoyed that.
Damon, James McMillan helped do cinematography on Avengers Endgame. Like he did like portions of it. He did portions of Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which is also one of the better looking Marvel movies. And he did a Rewind of the Living Dead classic, Damon. He was the cinematographer for Morbius.
Oh, wow.
Which, by the way, like for all of its faults, pretty good looking movie, like lensed very well. Like it actually looked like a proper like New York movie. I'm not gonna dog that part of it. I think James might have been the MVP of Morbius if we had the MVP back then. But yeah, it's a well shot movie. And what I liked about that, and I'm glad you brought it up, is that for its very like Hallmarky, like Lifetime movie like tone, he didn't shoot it like that. He shot it like a proper movie. Like to me, it felt a lot more like a movie like Sinister, or a movie like, I guess, Morbius, if you want to say, like something that had a little more depth and texture to it. Cinematographers are genuinely the unsung hero of most any movie. They're genuinely making more of the movie than the director is. The director's just sort of answering questions and solving problems all day. The cinematographer is actually designing the image that you end up seeing. And in conjunction, of course, with the director and producers and stuff, but they are often the unsung heroes. And a couple of years back, the Oscars wanted to like take cinematography and editing out of the main show. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Cinematography and editing are how you get a movie. You can do a lot of things, but without a great cinematographer and a great editor, you don't get an award-winning level movie. You need those things to make a movie an award-winning movie. And they wanted to get those things out of there. So I'm glad you picked a cinematographer as MVP, because they indeed are the MVP of most movies.
And also the set design. I also want to give a shout out to the set design.
Yeah, set design was cool.
The set design of the Never Ever specifically was really cool. I really enjoyed that. Let's move on to our next category, and that is Best Scare. There were some pretty good scares in this movie. A lot of traditional jump scares, but I was pretty impressed, actually, by some of the scares in this movie. So, Patrick, what was your favorite scare in Imaginary?
Yeah, the scares were the biggest portion of my notes, for sure. This movie tried to feed you as many scares as it possibly could, and mine was the actual reveal of the bear that you thought wasn't that good at all, when you realize that Chauncey is an actually really big bear, right? So that I think a little bit of it's in the trailers. Taylor's in the dark room with the creepy little merry-go-round lamp, very like the first movie, The Conjuring, very like Conjuring-esque kind of thing going on, and the light is like spreading across the room. Cool cinematography tricks. And then like there's a dark shadow in the room, and then when she shines the light, it's a big ass Chauncey bear. And I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty decent scare. And it didn't like scare me, but I thought to myself, like, a kid would be scared the shit out of this movie. That kept popping up in my head. That idea of like, I think a kid would find that really scary. Now I know why. Now, idiot Patrick figures out many, many, many hours later that's why this indeed was designed that way, was to scare kids. But I liked that the reveal of Chauncey the bear in all his glory.
The shadowy version of Chauncey in that room was much better. It's when they actually revealed him in the light, when it looked a little cheesier to me, and it looked like a giant puppet and or what I thought it was CGI, like a giant digital monster. Whether it was practical effects, that's fine, but it still looked like just a giant teddy bear, and it just looked like way too, like, not, there was nothing really scary about it to me. But the shadowy version, when you kind of see this outline and you see
Yeah.
kind of like a little bit of the eyes, that was good. That was when I really enjoyed it. And I was like, ooh, this is kind of creepy. So yeah, I'll give you that. That was actually really well done. And that was probably the better reveal of Chauncey versus when they actually go in Never Ever and they reveal him. And I was like, this is a little cheesy. But
that's totally my favorite version of him right then and there.
yeah. So my best scare is the most generic scare in this movie, but it legitimately made me like my heart jump real quick in the theater. I always say some of the best scares are the ones you see coming. Very early in the movie, before anything really happens, when Alice first befriends Chauncey in the house, she runs into her parents' room and she's playing a game of hide and go seek with her bear. And they're like, well, hide in here, hide under the covers and hide with us. And she's like, well, Chauncey will see me. She's like, oh, we'll cover you up. And they're all under the covers. They're having a good old time. And then they hear something in the room. And so Jessica kind of comes out of the covers and she looks and she doesn't see anything. And then you see a little thing in the corner and you're like, what the fuck? Is that Chauncey? And you're like, oh shit, the bear's actually in here. And I thought 100% the bear's going to be in the room. How did he get in the room? And that's going to be the beginning of the downward spiral of this thing is actually live. This is way before we find out that Chauncey was never actually real. But in my moment, I'm thinking, possessed bear is what I'm thinking of this movie. So Jessica looks around and the daughter and her husband are still under the bed and she's kind of under the covers. She's looking around and she looks under the bed and there's nothing there. She looks over the side, there's nothing there. And I'm like, this fucking bear is going to pop up at her at some point and it's going to scare us. She leans under the bed again and the daughter drops down and yells at her and the dad like scared her. Like the little girl jumps down and goes, ah! And Jessica goes, oh shit. And I was like, what a good scare, because I thought it was going to be the bear. And when it was the daughter just playing a trick on Jessica, I was like, that was a really effective jump scare.
It might have been the best scare in the whole movie. I think it's very classic. And it kind of brings up something when I think about it. Like, Damon, first of all, in what planet is the underside of your bed so vast that you can look around like that? Like, I don't know about you. Mine doesn't. Like, I couldn't fit my hand under it. Like, it's almost totally to the floor. So there's one thing, but it's a very horror trope thing, like to have that much space in your bed. Secondly, I've never had to do this. I've never had to literally just hang myself upside down and look under the bed. Every horror movie does this trope with the under the bed gag. Who does that? I mean, I would love to see a Damon Martin hang himself upside down and look under his bed for something scary. Like, nobody does that shit. But I expect it, and I go on that ride every time I see a horror movie.
Yeah, but I was genuinely impressed by that because like that bear's gonna pop up. Now again, you couldn't do the bear because the bear was never actually there. But that was a really good trick because I was looking for the bear and they sure made you think it was gonna be the bear. And then when the little girl just kind of yells and scares her, I thought it was. I was like, oh, good job, you got
good one.
Yeah,
it was a good one. It really was.
Yeah. Next category. You want to explain the next category? Because this was a Patrick original. I want to leave this to you.
Yeah, this one obviously is there was no gore or kills in this movie because it's a kids movie, so very light on those things. So we didn't bother with those categories this week, but it did get me.
Although thankfully the neighbor did get killed, and you see her blood come out from under the door, so they did off the annoying neighbor. So at least they did do that.
They did get rid of her off camera. Yeah, so I decided to add this category in because it really made me think about this. Because I go, this is not like what I would say it's a similar type of movie. We've had movies like this before, like some sort of a demon or malevolent spirit kind of chases a family around. So my question this time around was best house demon, because we're stuck in a house for the most part and we're being haunted or chased or pursued or however you want to say it by some sort of malevolent force. So, Damon, shall I ask you, what was your favorite house demon in all of horror?
So I cheated slightly because it's not one house, but it's many.
Well, I like when you cheat.
So my choice for best house demon, because the demon always comes out in a house, is Samara from The Ring.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's good.
Crawls out of the TV and, you see the video. Within 3 days, she comes out and kills you. I recently revisited The Ring. We're gonna have to review The Ring at some point. Now I know the original Ringu. I've seen it. It's great. But I saw The Ring first. I did not see Ringu when it first came out. I saw The Ring, and then I saw the Japanese original years later.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the Japanese original isn't great. I know it is. I've seen it. It's great. But I saw The Ring when it came out.
Yeah. Same.
The Ring was terrifying when it first came out. And that's a PG-13 movie.
Yep.
2007, I think, is when it came out, something like that.
I thought it was 1999. I guess I'm wrong.
Maybe it was earlier. I don't remember.
If it's 1999, we got a 25-year anniversary on our hands that we may need to settle. We got to figure that out.
That movie scared the piss out of me when I saw it. Anyways, Samara climbing out of the well and then climbing through the TV is fucking terrifying. And to this day, that creeps you out. That is a 100% creepy moment. And that, like, when you finally realize what is happening and it's Samara climbing out of that well, climbing out of the TV, and literally coming out into real life to kill you, it is absolutely terrifying.
And by the way, it came out in 2002, so we've got a couple of years before we hit that 25-year mark. But fantastic movie, really one of the all-time classics, and like a very good remake, which doesn't happen very often. An Americanized remake that actually is good and fucks around, and that's a great house demon. It really is. I went for Mr. Boogie, and Mr. Boogie is from a little film called Sinister, which we have reviewed, and you can go back and check that review out from back in the day because it was listed as one of the scariest films scientifically of all time. And I think at the time we reviewed it, it was number one. It was the scariest. The list changes every year. Mr. Boogie, to me, what I can't get out of my head is, you know, he goes back over these old 8mm home videos, and in one of them, it's in the pool. And that scene, hey, Night Swim, take some notes. Since we're dogpiling on Night Swim again. There's just this scene where there's that creepy spotlight kind of raking across a dark pool in the middle of the night, and you can see there's something under there. And you see it, and then it turns and looks at the camera. I mean, it's a thing of beauty. The craft work. Scott Derrickson alone needs to be put in the pantheon of horror film directors for just that little scene right there. It's such a thing of beauty, and it just made me like fully attached to Mr. Boogie. Because I go, whoever this guy is, like, I just love him. Cool as fuck. And by the way, a very sinister house demon that really makes for a very terrible demon that you do not want to cross. But just for that scene alone, I had to pick him. I was like, I can't get this guy out of my head. There's a lot of house demons, but Mr. Boogie is by far one of my favorites.
Mr. Boogie is incredible, and one thing I love about that movie, which if you go back and listen to it, we both gave it a pretty glowing review. I didn't take Sinister to be as scary as a lot of people did, but it is incredibly creepy, and that's where I put Mr. Boogie. Like, every time he watches those films, it gets worse and worse, and it's just incredibly creepy and just dark and, I mean, horrific. It's horrific. I mean, the imagery he sees in there, and then when you realize there is this malevolent force called Mr. Boogie, throughout these videos, it's freaky. And the brief glimpses you get of Mr. Boogie is absolutely terrifying in that movie. I think that's a great pull. That is one of the best. Like I said, I don't take Sinister as scary as much as I do very creepy and like almost like for lack of a better word, very sinister dread to it.
Yeah, totally.
It is really well done. Mr. Boogie's a great pull. That's an absolutely good answer. Man, talk about Mr. Boogie and Samara. We really went deep on that one.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they're just iconic. They're hard to kind of get out of your head. And I do want to give like an honorable mention to the Babadook. Or the Babadook. I can't remember what we settled on, but the Babadook is another one that's like really cool. I love. But we'll get into the Babadook one day, but I don't find that one quite as creepy as I do Mr. Boogie. Mr. Boogie is like, I kind of don't want to look at Mr. Boogie.
Babadook.
Oh, I was fucking. See, there used to be a time when there were no children in this house, but there was Babadook, and I would just in the dark just go, Babadook, dude. She'd be like, shut the fuck up. Don't fucking do that shit. That shit's too scary.
That is a good one. That is a very good one. Babadook is a very good one. Yeah, we'll have to review that at some point. We haven't done that.
It's a great movie. God,
It is.
Babadook's incredible.
Although that movie, not to get off topic or anything, that is a movie where I literally want to like just give the kid up for adoption. Like that is.
Oh, I have a lot of sympathy now as a parent. Yeah, back then I was like, just chuck that kid out the window. What are you doing? And now I'm like, okay, yeah, you actually have to, yeah,
Yeah,
you have to be a parent.
Yeah, you have to be a parent. Like I was the one. Like that was the movie where I was like, "Yep, I don't need kids. Don't ever want."
I will show many people who are like, I think I might have kids. Watch the Babadook and think again.
Yeah. When you're in school, I don't know if they still do this because we're old, but like when we were kids, like we always got the health education classes where they try to teach you like the dangers of sex as a teenager, and they generally try to scare you with sexually transmitted diseases. Now, I'm not saying that's bad because certainly you should not ever want to do that. Show the Babadook to kids and be like, this is the kid you're going to have if you start messing around and you have a kid as a teen. This is going to be your kid. And they're going to be like, no more sex. I don't want that. No.
Yeah, that will scare some kids into celibacy for sure.
You want the ultimate contraceptive? The kid from the Babadook. That's what you're going to end up with, all right?
There's another house demon for honorable mention.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to our next category, remake, sequel, or leave it alone. It's pretty self-explanatory, but just for the sake of the podcast, this is the category where we take whatever movie we are reviewing and we say, should you remake it, should you give it a sequel, or should you leave it alone? So, Patrick, for Imaginary, remake, sequel, leave it alone.
I'm a little bit torn on this because part of me is like, oh, do like a hardcore, like hard R remake. Like that'd be cool. That'd just be cool for me though. Like if I'm gonna go ahead and buy into what they're selling, which is like this is a horror movie for kids, and now that I know that, and now that I can appreciate it on a different level, let's go ahead and just sequelize it. And let's get more into the shadowy man that we never quite. I mean, we don't like they show him, and there's some actually great moments of like when they walk down the stairs and he's just kind of in the background somewhere. Like those are cool little moments. Like that's the real thing that's going on behind all of this. That's not Chauncey the Bear is just a manifestation of whatever that thing is. So you have more to get into, and maybe you push the envelope just a little bit farther in the sequel. Now that I know what we're up for, I would still ask for some less heavy-handed dialogue. But maybe a sequel is in order, Damon.
So not to just pile on the same answer, but I think the answer is sequel and here's my other suggestion, better marketing. Because again, we had no idea this was a kid's horror movie. And I'm not saying you had to bludgeon us over the head with it, but if I would have known that going in, I would have had a slightly different perspective.
And Damon, for all that heavy-handed dialogue that is in the movie, why not just give us a heavy-handed trailer that's like, this film is going to scare the shit out of your kids. Like, you know what I mean? Like just say that flat out in a trailer so I know what I'm getting into. And then maybe a lot of the people that were in that theater with me in LA will go, oh, okay, this is for kids. Got it. I didn't realize this was for kids. Now you can come in with a bit of a different expectation.
And they set it up really well because at the end of the movie, when they leave, they let the house burn down, and Jessica's like, it was full on Halloween kills where she's like, let it burn. They left and she takes the kids, which by the way, they go to a hotel. Dad is still nowhere to be found, by the way.
Still not there.
He still hasn't come back.
Where did he go? Europe?
Yeah, they go to the hotel, and while they're there checking in, they hear a little kid talking to his mother, and and the kid's like, my imaginary friend Billy or whatever the name was, like he's mad at me, and like they all like freeze and like, let's just go to a different hotel. That was pretty funny. They're like, fuck it, we're peacing out, we're getting out of here. But you just set it up to where you can have another, you can either keep this family and have it continue to haunt them, or you can move on and just have another family dealing with the imaginary friend of, some of this is not one malevolent force. There's many out there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it opens itself up for quite a few sequels.
Yeah, but again, marketing, this is going to scare the shit out of your children. Okay, there's your marketing. Don't put it to where we all think it's a horror movie made for you and me.
So, now I know.
Yeah. Next category, can we survive this horror film? This is the category, Patrick, where you and I inject ourselves into whatever horror film we are watching, and we say, can we survive this horror film? Now, right away, Can I help you with this category, Patrick?
I think you can, Dame, and I think you know me well enough.
So here's why you're surviving this horror movie, Patrick, because you are a father. You have 2 beautiful children at home. You wouldn't be there. You'd be out fucking around in tour on Europe or whatever, like this dad was. He was just fucking gone. Like, he never came back.
I travel for work, Damon. I would definitely be gone. I'd be like, no, I'm in Monaco right now. Whatever's happening at the house, you have to figure it out. I'm minimum 13 hours from getting home, so you have to figure it out.
But can I hope if your wife called you in a panic and said, Patrick, our son has gone missing,
yeah,
would you not be on the first flight? Because the fact that the girl goes missing, they go in the Never Ever, they come out, the house burned down, and they go to the hotel, and the dad still hasn't made it back.
It's at least a couple of days at that point. Like, it's at least 2 days. It's like he'd be home by the time they're in the hotel. Like, minimum, he'd be home by then. Or that, or he's just a shit father where he's like, you got it, right? You're cool because I got like these. He's like a rock star. I doubt it seems like he plays cafes, to be honest with you. But he's like, yeah, I got a real good gig going on over here. I can't leave it. It's like, fucker, just get on the fucking plane and get back and figure this shit out.
So by that definition alone, you'd survive because
I'm not here, physically not here.
Yeah. So for me, I'm gonna go the other route because I did have an imaginary friend as a kid. So I'm gonna put myself in that role, and I had a very vivid imagination as a child. I definitely did. Like, I played, full on like G.I. Joe with my friends. Like, I used to make full on, like, I would play G.I. Joes, but I would make full on like bases, and I would turn dresser drawers into like a fortress for Cobra. Mm-hmm. I was a very imaginative kid, and I would take styrofoam and I would build it and color it, and I would build full on fortresses and stuff. So my point of why I don't think I would survive this is because you drag me into Never Ever, and I would never want to go. I'd be like, fuck this. Leave me here forever. I'm going to stay here with Chauncey, and we're going to build some fucking fortresses. So, yeah, I would probably stay there forever and never come back.
Yeah, it actually doesn't seem like that bad of a place. It's just they just pissed off Chauncey. That's the only thing they really did wrong.
Yeah, like the scene when they find Alice in her bedroom, she's surrounded by presents, eating cake or something, and she's just like, I have everything I ever want here. I'm eating, I got presents.
Yeah, her mom was like normal again, like her mom wasn't all fucked up.
Yeah,
I was like, this is a great place. Why would she want to leave here?
Yeah, it's not like Chauncey is like torturing the souls of the children or anything. Like,
no.
They kind of I'm kind of like, why would you want to leave this place? Like, you're not making this out to be like a really terrifying, scary place for children.
Yeah, I'd be like, hey, Chauncey, can you make this into like a 3,500 square foot home? Like, can I get like a dad, like a man cave or something?
Yeah.
Like, let's just build this out. What we're doing here. Let's just expand on that.
I get everything I ever want, and I don't have to work anymore. Is this
this sounds great.
This doesn't sound like a nightmare at all to me right now. Can I go there now? Can I move into the Never Ever right now?
I'll bring the whole family with me to Never Ever, and they'd be like, Dad, this is awesome. I'll be like, yeah, I know.
Yeah, you don't have to work, you don't do anything, you have presents around you all day. Like, this really doesn't sound like the nightmare escape you're making it out to be. No, Patrick, you have to come back to reality. Fuck reality, I'm staying here.
Isn't it an election year? I think I'm going to stay here until that bull's over.
Yeah, so as I said, I would stay in the Never Ever, so I guess I'm not surviving because I would voluntarily be like, hey, can I go? Can I never come back? So, yeah. Last category, is it scary? That is the last category of the day, Patrick, as we always ask with every horror movie we review on the show here, is it scary? So at the end of the day, imaginary, is it scary?
Damon, I can answer for you that it didn't scare you or me. We already know that. I think we knew that coming in. I think we knew that when we saw the first trailer, that this was not going to be a movie that was going to scare us. But it has a lot of scares in it. And the audience I was with, they were genuinely reacting. There were moments where they were just like, oh, we're like, where they were like, oh, is that the bear? No, you heard everybody giving back the feedback that the movie is looking for. So on some level, it certainly works, right? It takes a lot to scare you and me. You and me just watched another French extremist movie and we were like, it was all right. It was no martyrs. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's just how this shit goes. So no, it's not scary, but It'll scare kids for sure. And it's going to scare a few adults, not a lot of them. But the scares are there. They're certainly built in. I can't pretend like they're not.
If this is a movie that is built towards 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, then it is scary. And so that's why I'm going to give my answer. It is scary because that is who this movie was made for. And again, not to repeat myself for the 80th time, I just wish it had been marketed better in that regard. Because had I known that going in, not only would I not have, like, I knew going into Five Nights at Freddy's, it was a kid's video game. The movie still didn't work for me, though. I still did not I still didn't like anything about that movie. That's the difference here, though. Now that I know what this film was going for, I enjoyed it a lot more, which is a weird thing to say. You should be able to enjoy a movie. But again, you don't watch it. You watch a Disney movie, as you said, it's kind of mindless. It's child entertainment. It's not meant for adults. Now, do adults enjoy it and can enjoy it? Sure. But that's not who it's for. That's not who they make it for. They inject little fun jokes so the adults can kind of grab onto it and they made like a kind of like an innuendo or whatever, like they do in I know they've done that in like a Shrek and things like that, where they make like little kind of sexual innuendos or jokes that the adults are supposed to get, but it doesn't like harm the kids. But this is ultimately a movie made for 10, 12, tweens, 12, 13-year-old kids. And for that regard, it's scary and it works really well. And again, I just wish it had been better marketed. To be clear, that's what it was, because it works in that regard. In that regard of a film, it is a scary film, and I liked it for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's wrapped up in some cheesy dialogue and some suspect acting and pacing, because the script is certainly designed for that age demographic. But deep down at its core, there's a good story there.
Yeah. So Imaginary, get you again. Know what you're going into. That's my only recommendation. Just know what you're going to. If you know what you're going into, I not to be, no pun intended, I imagine you're going to enjoy this film better than you and I did walking out saying it wasn't good, but we kind of dug it because of what it is. It's a Hallmark, cheesy, life, like very over the top, over explained, overly narrative movie. But when you know what is being, you know who is being geared towards, you're kind of like, oh, okay, now I know why you had to inject that really annoying neighbor who had to literally tell me everything ever about imaginary friends.
They wrote Disney movies, no wonder.
Yeah, they're like, here's this neighbor who's going to tell you all about El Kukui, and we're going to learn all about it, the Sumerian legend. So let's go. Literally show you photos from the album. All right, that is our episode, folks. We want to say a big thank you, as always, to everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, over on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. We are trying to add subscribers to our YouTube channel, so please go over and subscribe to that. We really would appreciate it. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up anytime on social media. You can find us at Rewind of the Living Dead on Twitter, X, on Instagram, and on Facebook. You can also send us messages over there. You can also send us emails. We've gotten a lot of emails from you guys lately, and we really do appreciate that. Send us emails at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. And you can always find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show. We will be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then.
Peace.